This is a recording of our playbook. Download the playbook, configuration spreadsheet, and A-Bay lab environment from our website. Welcome to our whiteboard drawing, Enterprise 20 Dial Plan Build, Blocking on Lines Class of Service for Delayed 7-Digit Dialing, Part 2. Once we have our patterns, we can think about partitions and calling search spaces. Remember our dial plan hierarchy. The internal patterns will all be in the internal partition as discussed earlier. The off-net to on-net site-specific translation patterns will also be in the internal partition. We have an enterprise internal no 911 calling search space containing only the internal partition. We have site-specific internal partitions for the site-specific translation patterns for internal dialing. The XXX internal partition will be the partition for site XXX. We have the NANP partition for all of the external North American numbering plan patterns. Each site will have a site-specific unrestricted calling search space, XXX unrestricted calling search space, containing the internal partition, the site-specific internal partition, XXX internal partition in the drawing, and the NANP partition. Phones at site XXX are configured with XXX unrestricted calling search space. Blocking patterns will be placed in specific blocking partitions. The blocking patterns and partitions are global, meaning they apply to all sites across the enterprise. The 911 and 9.911 patterns will go in the block E911 partition. The 9.2 to 811 pattern will go in the block service partition. The local 7 and 10-digit patterns will go in the block local partition. The toll-free pattern will go in the block toll-free partition. You could put this pattern in the block local partition instead. The long distance pattern will go in the block long distance partition. The international patterns will go in the block international partition. And the high-risk patterns will go in the block restricted partition. We'll build a set of blocking calling search spaces. We'll prefix these with line because they go on the line. This is not the greatest naming convention, but we're going with it anyway. The line unrestricted calling search space blocking calling search space will be empty. This calling search space blocks nothing. The line international calling search space blocking calling search space contains the block restricted partition. Only high-risk numbers will be blocked. The line long-distance calling search space blocking calling search space contains the block restricted and block international partitions. The line local calling search space blocking calling search space contains the block restricted, block international, and block long distance partitions. The line internal calling search space blocking calling search space contains the block restricted, block international, block long distance, block toll free, block local, and block service partitions. Where are we going to use the block E911 partition? Why would we ever want to block 911 calls? How about, for call forward all, we don't want someone to fat finger 911 as a call forward all destination. 911 calls shouldn't come out of our voicemail ports. We'll be proactive and prevent this. Some roaming devices, such as Cisco IP communicator, should not be able to dial 911. And gateways and trunks where incoming tail-end hop-off calls could be expected, for example, a trunk between a cluster in San Diego and one in Winnipeg. We'll create site-specific unrestricted no 911 calling search spaces. For each site, copy the site-specific unrestricted calling search space, giving it a new name. Insert the block 911 partition before the NANP partition. We'll do this for every site. Let's walk through the line and device configuration. Devices, phones in particular, are configured with site-specific calling search spaces and site-specific device pools. All lines are in the internal partition. Phone device pools at each site indicate the route group to use for the local route group. Using the local route group in the NANP PSTN route list means use the route group in the device pool. Phones in Toronto will use the Toronto 55 PSTN route group containing the Toronto 55 PSTN gateway. Phones in Hamilton will use the Hamilton 601 PSTN route group containing the Hamilton 601 PSTN gateway. And phones in Winnipeg will use the Winnipeg 602 PSTN route group containing the Winnipeg 602 PSTN gateway. We have both unrestricted and unrestricted No 911 calling search spaces. We'll leave the unrestricted calling search space on the device for our blocking on lines configuration option, XXX unrestricted calling search space for all hard or fixed phones, XXX unrestricted No 911 calling search space for all soft phones or clients. For now, we'll leave the XXX unrestricted calling search spaces on these devices for testing. Here's an illustration of a Toronto 55 site phone configuration. All DNs have the same format and are in the internal partition. Toronto phones are in a Toronto device pool based on the type of device. All Toronto device pools indicate the local route group. All Toronto phones have a Toronto unrestricted calling search space. Here's what it looks like for 3 sites. It's a simple template. We should really use the No 911 calling search spaces for CIPC device pools. We'll switch to these once we've done testing. Because the line partitions take priority over the device partitions, we can take away calling privileges by blocking the patterns on the line. Blocking on lines calling search spaces will be applied to lines on phones and device profiles, voicemail ports, call forward all, and other places in CUCM configuration. Where can we call from 8-602-4001? We can call any number in the NANP except international and high risk because these are blocked on the line. We can also call all enterprise internal numbers and site abbreviated dialing. If the call is routed, then the gateway or gateways indicated in Winnipeg 602 PSTN route group will be used. There's always special circumstances. We have 2 special circumstances, E.164/ISDN and tail-end hop-off. Remember what we did for E.164 incoming calling party numbers? Localize the E.164 numbers into 2 formats, long distance and international. This option is easy to implement. Figuring out how to map E.164 incoming calling party numbers onto these 2 patterns is simple. It doesn't matter if the calling party is local or long distance. Users can return calls to any number in the NANP with this single pattern. Lines 2 and 3 on the Toronto test phone represent local 7-digit and 10-digit numbers. When calling into the Toronto 55 site from these lines across the E.164 SIP trunk, the calling party number will be set to an 11-digit long-distance number. Here's what the call looks like on Toronto 55 57001. And here's the problem. The patterns in the call list will be long-distance patterns. A user with the line local calling search space will not be able to use the call list to return local calls without using edit dial because the long-distance pattern is blocked. We would have the same problem if an ISDN service provider sends and receives caller ID, including local 10-digit numbers as 10-digit national numbers. We'll fix this. We'll add more specific patterns to the unrestricted calling search space on the device to indicate which area codes to treat as local area codes. We'll add the same patterns but blocking to the line internal calling search space so that our internal class of service works properly. A local area code is an area code in a 10-digit number, a number where we don't dial 1 first. An area code is an area code in an 11-digit number, a number where we do dial 1 first. We need to find the local area codes at gateways using E.164 addressing, or that always send caller ID flagged as ISDN type national. In our case, it's the Toronto 55 gateway using E.164. We can use the local calling guide to find the local area codes. Navigate to this address. Once there, click on the Search Area Code Prefix OCN link. Put the area code, NPA, and office code, NXX, of your gateway in the indicated boxes. Click Submit. On the next screen, click here on the NPA NXX. These are the local area codes from our ABAY 691 site. Just look them up in the display. Calls from local areas will always be transformed to 11-digit long-distance patterns in call lists. We'll use the local area codes we looked up to build specific patterns identifying which area code should be treated as local. We'll adjust our Toronto 55 unrestricted calling search spaces to include the new partition. We'll add the new patterns to the block local partition so that our line local calling search space keeps on working. Coming up next, Enterprise 20 Dial Plan Build, Patterns for No Delayed Dialing. Thanks for watching!